What's up, everybody? Welcome to our Wednesday morning teaching video. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for tuning in this past Sunday morning to our Sunday morning online experience. It was awesome. And then don't forget to tune in this Sunday morning, man. We're going to have another cool online experience. I'm also going to be talking about some very crucial, very important, and very exciting things for the Water's Edge Church and our whole reopening process and relaunching and all that kind of cool stuff. So make sure you tune in Sunday morning. But today, I want to talk to you about a Christian response, the right response to uninvited suffering and pain in our life. Now, I was raised in church my entire life. In fact, 9 months before I was born, I was going to church. I tell people all the time that I grew up with a drug problem. I was drugged to Sunday morning Sunday school. I was drugged to Sunday morning church. I was drugged to Sunday night church. I was drugged to Wednesday night church. I was drugged to youth group. I was drugged to youth camp. I've been beat with a Jesus stick my entire life. My daddy was a pastor my entire life, and my mom was a Sunday school teacher, man. So they taught me about Jesus, and I was always raised in church. So as a little boy, growing up in the 70s and the 80s, we were going to a church in Moss Bluff. And then my dad eventually went on staff at that church. And we saw that church go from maybe just 100 people to over 1,000 when we were there in the 80s. And so that church experienced a lot of growth, and God was really moving, and God was doing some great things. He still is doing great things at that church. But we were there. And I remember when I was around 6 years old as a little boy, I remember going to those Sunday night worship services. And sometimes they would last for a couple of hours because God seemed to be really moving. And during those Sunday night services, they would give something called invitations at the end of the service where people would walk down the aisle and they would come up for prayer or counseling, or sometimes they would want to give their heart and life to Jesus, start a relationship with Jesus, or get saved or get born again. And I can remember as a little boy thinking that was fascinating, because after people would give their heart to Jesus and they would get saved, the very next week, they would get baptized. They would get dunked in water by the pastor. Now, as a little boy, 6 years old, I loved to swim. Man, I was like a little fish. I loved it. It's one of my favorite things to do, still is. And so I thought that was pretty awesome, that when you get saved, you get to take a swim in front of the whole church. And so in my little mind, 6-year-old brain, I thought, man, that's what I want to do. I want to get saved. But what I was really thinking was, I want everyone to see me swim in front of the whole church. So I remember one Sunday night after church was over, a bunch of people from our church at that time would come over to our house and just hang out and eat. And I remember when everyone left that night, I pulled my dad off to the side and I said, Dad, I want to get saved. And he was like, great, that's awesome. He was just moved, but he didn't know what was going on in my mind, because what was really going on in my mind was, man, I can't wait to take a swim in front of the whole church. Well, that week, my dad called the pastor over to our house, and they both sat me down in our living room on the couch, and one grown man sat on this side of me, and my dad sat on this side of me, and they began to ask me questions about Jesus and questions about the Bible. And because I was raised in church, I knew all the answers to those questions. Tony, do you believe that Jesus loves you? Yes, I do. The Bible teaches that. Tony, do you believe that Jesus wants to be your Lord and Savior? Yes, I do. The Bible teaches that. Do you believe that Jesus died on the cross for your sins? I believe that. The Bible teaches that. Do you believe that 3 days later Jesus rose from the dead? I believe that. The Bible teaches that. Tony, do you believe if you invite Jesus into your heart right now that he will save you and give you salvation and have this relationship with Jesus? Yes, sir. I believe all those things. And so they led me in a prayer to ask Jesus to forgive me of my sins and to come into my heart. And as I was praying that prayer, I remember my dad sitting next to me, and he started weeping. He started crying because in his mind, he thought my middle boy, my boy's giving his heart to Jesus. And he was emotional, and because he was emotional, that made me emotional. But guess what happened to me that night? Nothing. Nothing happened to me at all, because I didn't understand what was going on. I'm not saying that 6-year-olds don't understand or can't understand. I'm just saying that for me, I didn't understand. I was just thinking, man, I can't wait to take a swim in front of the whole church. So they led me in this prayer to invite Jesus into my heart. I did that. I didn't know what was really going on. I didn't really understand it, but I felt good because it made my dad proud of me. The very next Sunday, I got to get baptized in front of the whole church. I got to take that swim. I was so excited that when the pastor dunked me underneath the water, my feet flew out from under me and I kicked water all over this old lady in a choir. after that, we had a fellowship at the church, and I remember running around the entire church that night, making sure everyone saw my hair soaking wet because I just got to get baptized. I got to swim in front of the whole church. Yes, I did have hair back then, and I had great hair, man. It was like vanilla ice. It was so thick and tall, I could have smuggled dope in my hair, man. It was Consort hairspray. Now it's gone. Anyway, man, I ran around the whole church that night, wanted to make sure everyone saw me with my hair wet. 3 years later, I'm 9 years old, and I'm sitting at a big revival service at the Civic Center that my dad helped organize. And I remember sitting there, and I remember the Spirit of God speaking to my heart saying, Tony, I want you to give your life to me. I want to have a relationship with you. And it kind of confused me because I thought, well, I just did that 3 years ago. I've even been baptized, and on top of that, I'm a good kid. I don't cuss. I don't throw rocks at old ladies. I don't litter. My dad's a preacher. My mom's a Sunday school teacher. Jesus, you got the wrong guy. You want the guy next to me. He's really bad. I know him, but I'm a good kid, man. I've done this before, but it was like Jesus, by his Spirit, was saying, no, I want to change your life. I want to have a real, intimate, living, loving relationship with you, not some religious ritual with you. And so, man, it kind of confused me. And I remember hearing testimonies after that from people, older people saying, I thought that I was a Christian when I was younger, but as I got older, I realized I didn't understand, so I had to do it for real. And I thought, well, maybe that's what's happening to me. Maybe I need to do it for real because I didn't understand. And then I would hear other people stand up and say, well, man, don't let the devil lie to you and tell you you're not a Christian. He's just trying to make you doubt, to make you ineffective. And I thought, well, maybe that's what's happening. As a 9-year-old boy, this was a lot to take in. I felt like one of those cartoons, like I had that little devil on this shoulder and the little angel on this shoulder, and they're both whispering in my ear, and there was this tug-of-war in my soul. So I didn't really know what to do. I just kind of pushed it aside, and I didn't want to deal with it because I was scared to death of God. I was growing up in a hellfire and brimstone church, and I always thought that I was a failure, and I always thought that I wasn't good enough, and I always thought that God was just going to get me, and so I ran from that and ran from that and ran from that. And year after year after year, as I got older, this emptiness on the inside of me started growing because I didn't have a real, living, loving relationship with Jesus Christ. And so naturally, like we all do growing up, I started looking for things to fill that emptiness in my soul. I looked in music, I looked in lifestyles, I looked in substances, I looked in certain groups of friends, I looked in basketball, I fell in love with basketball. And for a short amount of time, these things can kind of take away that emptiness, but the emptiness always comes back. Some of these things aren't even bad things, but if you use them to fill that emptiness that only Jesus can fill, that emptiness is just going to grow bigger and bigger and bigger on the inside of your soul. And nothing ever filled that emptiness but year after year. By this time, my daddy was a pastor. And every time I would hear my daddy preach, man, I would feel that emptiness. And I would feel like Jesus was knocking on the door of my heart saying, come to me, let me in, let me change your life, let me save you. And I just kept running from that and running from that. Until I was 19 years old, about to turn 20 years old. It was after a revival service one night at a church my dad was pastoring in DeQuincy, Louisiana. And I remember after the service, it was like a Monday night, I think, and we were sitting on the couch and we were watching the NBA playoffs. It was the Lakers versus the Pistons. I couldn't stand the Lakers. I'm a huge fan of the Detroit Pistons, and I still am. Joe Dumars, Isaiah Thomas. So, man, I was into that game. But as we were sitting there watching that game, I wanted my dad to ask me if I knew for sure that I was really a Christian and if I really had a relationship with Jesus. So I could say, no, Dad, and thank you, because I've been dealing with this for 10 years. Since I was 9 years old till now, I was 19. For 10 years, I've been wrestling with this. But my dad never would push the issue because my dad didn't want my faith to be his faith. God doesn't have grandchildren. God only has children. And my dad didn't want to manipulate me. So my dad never would ask me that. And so finally, my dad knew that I was struggling. I was sitting there, and I finally got up enough courage to ask my dad. I said, hey, Dad, I said, do you remember when I was 6 years old in our living room in Moss Bluff, and I prayed with you and the pastor, and I asked Jesus to come into my life and all that kind of stuff. So do you remember that? He goes, yeah, I remember that. He goes, you need to talk to me about something? And I said, well, I said, I've been bad. He's like, well, I know. And I thought, well, crap. I said, Dad, you don't understand. I've been really bad. He goes, Tony, you don't understand. I really know. And I thought, uh-oh. And I started confessing everything. He's like, I know. Tony, do you need to talk to me about something? And at that time, pride and fear rose up in me. And I said, no, Dad, I don't need to talk about anything. I'm okay. So at that time, my dad stands up and my dad says, well, I'm going to go to bed. Good night. And he walked out of the living room. And I thought, man, I missed my chance. I missed my opportunity. Well, a few seconds later, my dad comes walking back in the living room. He goes, well, I can't go to sleep because your mom and your little brother are in the bedroom working on homework. So we continued to watch the basketball game, the Pistons versus the Lakers. And so I finally got up enough courage again. And I was like, Dad, I feel like I'm struggling. I feel like I'm really going through something. I said, I'm really hurting on the inside and I don't know what to do. He's like, Tony, what do you need to talk about? And I said, I don't know. I said, nothing. I'll figure this out. And a little while later, he goes, okay, and he stood up. And right as he walked out of the living room to go to bed, he said something to me I never will forget. He said, Tony, I want you to remember something. You can't rescue yourself. You can't figure this out yourself. Good night. And he walked out of the living room. And at that time, I went to my bedroom, and my dad went to my parents' their bedroom. And my dad's one of these dudes who always fell asleep by 9:45, 10 o'clock at night. He had his routine. He would get in his boxer briefs and his wife beater, and he would tuck it in, and I have no idea why he tucked his shirt into his underwear, but that's just what our parents did. And he would eat a banana and a Pop-Tart, get crumbs all over his shirt, and pass out and go to sleep. 9:45, 10 o'clock clockwork every night. But this was around 10 o'clock that night where he went to his bedroom and I went to my bedroom. And for the next 2 hours in my bedroom, I just was wrestling with the Spirit of God. Now, I always tell people, I'm not one of these weirdos who says, hey, man, Jesus walked into my house last night and made me a sandwich and we ate it, dude. Like, that's not me. But when I went and sat down on my bed, on the edge of my bed in my bedroom, I felt like the Spirit of God just started speaking to me, and I was wrestling with God, and I felt like Jesus said, man, tonight's the night. You've been denying me. You've been running from me for 10 years. Settle this tonight. And I wrestled with God for like 2 hours till like midnight or 12:30. And I finally got up enough courage to walk down the hallway and to go wake up my dad. Now remember, my dad's always asleep by 10 o'clock at night, and this is around midnight, 12:30. And as I'm walking down that hallway from my bedroom to my parents' bedroom, I just see all of my brokenness and I just break down and I know that I needed Jesus. So I opened up my parents' bedroom door, and there I find my dad sitting on the edge of the bed in the dark, staring at the floor. And I said, Dad, I need to give my life to Jesus so I can have a relationship with Jesus. And he looked at me, he goes, I know. And I've been waiting for you. At that time, we both stood up and we walked down the hallway to my bedroom, and I got on my face. I wasn't in a church. I was in my bedroom. I got down on my knees. I got snot and tears all over the carpet, and I begged Jesus to come into my life and to change my life. That night, my decision wasn't about life after death. It wasn't about eternity. It was about Jesus changing my life. And after that, he started changing my life. I've been trying to walk with Jesus ever since. At that time, I had a very limited understanding of how complex and confusing life could be, and also how deep our relationship with Christ could really go. I'm the type of guy, and you need to know this, I'm also the type of pastor who's always reading, I'm always studying, and I'm always trying to evolve and to change so I can get better. I want better convictions. I want better beliefs. I want better opinions. I want better theology. I want better doctrine. I want better interpretations. So I'm always searching. Jesus and my relationship is always unfolding. So I'm always trying to evolve into someone who is better. And I began to experience stories back then, and even still today, that deeply, deeply challenged my faith. I remember one time I was a counselor at a youth camp, and the last day of youth camp, me and another youth minister had to go find one of the teenage girls that ran away from camp out into the woods. And when we found her in the woods, she was weeping and crying. And this is what she said. We said, why are you running away? This is the last day of camp. Why are you hiding in the woods? She goes, I don't want to go home. I want to stay at camp. We said, why don't you want to go home? She goes, because when I go home, my mom and my stepdad abuse me physically, sexually, mentally. It's awful. She had cigarette burns all over her arms. We had to contact the authorities. And I remember thinking back then as a young Christian and a young youth minister, she didn't invite this pain into her life. She didn't ask for it. So why did God allow this to happen? What do you do with pain like this? What do you do with suffering like this? I remember at the first church that I was pastoring, there was a young mom at that church. She was married to another young man. They had their first child, a little boy. When he was born with spinal bifida. He was born crippled. Well, not too long after that, her husband began to cheat on her, see someone else, and he left her to raise that young boy all by herself. I watched that young boy learn how to walk with crutches, and I watched that young single mom struggle on her own. And I remember thinking, what do I do in my mind and in my heart and in my faith with this kind of pain, this kind of uninvited, unwanted, undeserved suffering in life? It was confusing to me. And I didn't know what the correct Christian response was. What's the correct Christian response? Because oftentimes when you ask Christians, what do you do with this kind of pain? They give you some bumper sticker answer. Well, you just let go and let God. Give it to God. How do you do that? What does that mean? What does it mean to let go and let God? I've never found anyone who can explain that to me. Give it to God. You want me to wrap it up like a present and give it to? I mean, no one can explain what that means. Well, just God's on his throne. Trust him. What does that mean? Those aren't the best responses. When I was a youth minister, the first church that I was on staff at, there was a young man in my youth group whose dad got arrested in trouble for molesting young kids in the neighborhood. After that, his mom got cancer. She ended up passing away. The church really rallied around this young man, but because of how he was raised, he had a deep anger problem. I remember always thinking, why did he have to go through this? Why did he have to be born into this type of life? He didn't want this. He didn't ask for this. A few years ago, I found a news article about him. He had moved to another state. He had gotten so angry one night with his newborn baby that he lost his temper and he began to shake that baby until it died. He's in prison right now. I remember thinking, what a life, what a difficult life. How hard. The pain, the suffering, the regret. What do you do? What's the correct Christian response to suffering like this? How do you make sense of this? Because the world is broken. And what should be our answer to this? And not to mention all the depression, all the suicidal thoughts, all the hate, all the oppression, all the abuse that we have seen strike innocent people. What do you do with this? How do you respond to this? And when this happens, I always remember these words that the Apostle Paul told the Corinthian church. In 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 8 through 9, and I'm reading out of the New Living Translation. Paul says, "We think you ought to know, dear brothers and sisters, about the trouble we went through in the province of Asia. We were crushed and overwhelmed beyond our ability to endure. We were crushed and overwhelmed beyond our ability to endure. And we thought we would never live through it. He said. In fact, we expected to die. But as a result, we stopped relying on ourselves and we learned to rely on God who raises the dead." I had a friend ask me the other day how to properly respond to suffering, uninvited suffering in our life. What's the correct Christian response? And so this is what I told him, and keep this in mind today. On suffering, sometimes there's no mental category to put it in. It's too much. Paul said that he, by suffering in life, was pressed beyond measure or pushed beyond his capacity to deal with it. And that's the only way I've figured out how to deal with universal, uninvited pain in our life. And that's this. Have you ever heard someone say, "It's okay, hold on, because God's not going to put more on you than you can handle"? Have you ever heard someone say that? You've said that to people. I've said that to people before I knew better. It's okay, hold on, because God won't allow you to go through something that you can't handle. God won't put more on you than you can handle. Look at me right now. That is not true. And the Bible does not teach that. Right here in this passage, Paul says that we were pressed and crushed beyond measure or beyond our capacity to deal with it. It was too much to handle, and we despaired even for our very own life. Sometimes we didn't even want to live. So sometimes, in order to really make sense of things, you have to explain it in a different way. So if I could explain this passage to you in a way that helps us frame how you and I as Christians are supposed to approach uninvited suffering and pain in our life, I would put it this way. If you're still with me, say I'm still with you. Yes, God will allow you to go through pain in life that is much too much for you to handle. Why? So you and I can learn to live and walk by faith instead of trusting in our own abilities. The Christian life is about faith and resolve. The Christian life is about faith and resolve. Why? Because this teaches us to trust more in our resurrected King, Jesus Christ. The Christian life is about faith and resolve. So the next time circumstances in your life put too much on you, more than you can handle, don't trust in your own abilities. Draw close to Jesus. Trust in your resurrected King, Jesus Christ, and walk by faith and resolve. We love you. Have a good week. Thank you so much for tuning in.
We want to thank you so much for joining us for today's midweek message. If you found this message encouraging, or if you have a prayer request, make sure to drop that in the comments down below. If you want to further partner with the church, there's 4 simple ways to do so. The first way is you can give online. You can visit watersedgegathering.com and click on giving. From there, you'll be led to eGive, our online giving platform. Or you can text to give. You can text the word give to 337-223-9003. From there, you can enter your dollar amount, and then you'll be led to on-screen instructions. Or you can give within the church app. Make sure to go to your app store and download the church app. And within the church app, search Water's Edge Gathering. Click on the name and you're in. From there, you can give your tithes and offerings. Or you can give by mail. You can do so by mailing Water's Edge Gathering at P.O. Box 572, Lake Charles, Louisiana 70602, or Water's Edge Gathering at 2760 Power Center Parkway, Lake Charles, Louisiana 70607. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, and we'll see you Sunday morning for our next online experience. We love you guys.